Right then, welcome back everyone. Today we're talking about one of the greatest directors of all time, Martin Scorsese. With his new film, The Killers of the Flower Moon, in cinemas right now, I've had the incredibly original idea to go back and rank all of his films in a tier list. Now if you've seen a Scorsese film before, you know it's going to be epic, emotional, powerful, and almost certainly star Leonardo DiCaprio or Robert De Niro. Hey! In all seriousness though, this man is responsible for creating some of the best films of all time, and coincidentally has some of the best eyebrows of all time.
Oh brother, this guy stinks!
Now before we start, there are a couple of caveats I just need to mention. Firstly, Scorsese really has no bad films, so an F rank here is just with respect to his other films, and realistically any film in that category is still better than 90% of all films out there. Secondly, I couldn't find any good copies of his really early work, and so there are a few titles missing from this list, namely Who's That Knocking at My Door, Boxcar Bertha, Mean Streets, New York, New York, and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. So if any of those are your favourite films, I can only apologise. There are, however, some real hidden gems in here that I don't think you'll have heard of, so make sure you stick around to the end to find out about those. I also should probably mention that there are some spoilers ahead, not for Killers of the Flower Moon of course, but just for the older films. Now I don't want to see any whinging or complaining in the comments. Some of these films are almost 50 years old, so you've literally got no excuse for not having seen them yet. Just grow up and watch them. Sorry about that. So with all that said, let's get on with it and start with the first film, Taxi Driver. And what better place to start than with one of the most powerful and influential films of all time. I struggle to go 2 days without saying,
You talking to me? You talking to me?
If you don't know what this film's about, basically it's a character study of a deeply disturbed, mentally unstable war veteran called Travis Bickle, who works as a nighttime taxi driver in New York. Travis is appalled by the sleaziness and depravity he sees around him, and so, after a particular event that I won't give details on occurs, Travis is compelled to take matters into his own hands and institute the changes he feels are necessary. Now for me, this film shows why Scorsese is at the very top. For his character work. I'm going to sound like a broken record by the end of this video for saying this, but De Niro's performance is exceptional. This film is the film that put him on the map, and you can clearly see why. The film is him. I don't really go a bundle on the story to be honest, and I personally find the big payoff at the end not nearly big enough. But I don't care, because all I'm paying attention to is Travis. The supporting cast, especially Jodie Foster, are all great, and the atmosphere that Scorsese creates of nighttime New York is just so captivating. I know a lot of people say, oh well, De Niro's great and all, but what's the point of the film? And to those people I say, F you, why does a film need to have a point? Just enjoy it for what it is. Now I can't justify giving it an S tier, seeing as I just said I don't like the story, so I'm going to give Taxi Driver A tier. Raging Bull is a biopic of the legendary boxer Jake LaMotta, who is portrayed by Robert De Niro. However, for a film about a boxer, it's really not got a lot to do with boxing at all. It's more about his life outside of the ring, and how his incredible anger and temper eventually caused him to lose everything he loved. The film is very intense, and the scenes depicting Jake's verbal and physical abuse of his wife are particularly disturbing. There's a quote from the real Jake LaMotta and his then wife Vicky, where after having watched the film, Jake broke down in tears and asked his wife, "Was I really like that?" To which she responded, "You were worse." I think I need to start a counter for the amount of times I'm going to say this, but De Niro in this film is outstanding. He earned his first Academy Award for this role, and rightfully so. Another thing this film gives us, which we'll see a lot of later on, is a first look at De Niro and Joe Pesci working alongside each other. Pesci plays Jake's brother, Joey, and in my eyes, this man can do no wrong. I absolutely love him. Now unfortunately, I do have to say I did find this film a bit boring. I know I have the attention span of a plank of wood, but for me it just didn't hook me. And so on balance, I have to give this film B tier. This one really surprised me. I was expecting to be bored out of my mind, but I was anything but. This film was absolutely brilliant. It's about a man named Rupert Pupkin, played by Shock, Robert De Niro, who's trying to be the next big thing in the world of comedy and be just like his idol, Jerry Langford. Now, what we realise very quickly about Rupert, however, is that he is completely delusional and is in fact obsessed with Jerry. He creates fantasies in his head of conversations and interactions with Jerry and claims they're close friends after just one brief meeting. He has cardboard cutouts of him at his home and acts out entire comedy shows to himself every evening. As the film goes on, Rupert's behaviour becomes more and more alarming and his obsession becomes dangerous, culminating in an ending I guarantee you won't predict. Now, I have to say, I think this might be my favourite De Niro performance. I don't remember the last time I was that immersed in his story and so wholeheartedly believed the character was real. I never once saw Rupert as just De Niro reading lines. He was truly exceptional. One final thing I noticed was that clearly the 2019 Joker film had taken inspiration from this film. Now, I don't know if this is common knowledge or if the writers of the Joker had already stated this, but there are clear, undeniable parallels between the two films. I wonder if the casting of De Niro as Murray in Joker was a nod to this film. Anyways, this film was a real find. Easy S tier. After Hours is about Paul, who is not played by Robert De Niro. Paul is an ordinary guy who, after receiving a phone number from a girl he met at a cafe, has the night of his life, but not in a good way, when he's invited to her apartment later that evening. The film is of course set in New York, and the entire film takes place over the course of one night. Now, in this film, Paul seems to be about the only normal person in the whole of New York. Everyone he meets on his journey back home is in one way or another absolutely mental, particularly the 5 women he runs into. Now, I don't know if Scorsese was going through a breakup or something at the time, but every woman he meets in this film is absolutely neurotic. With that said, I actually really enjoyed the film. It's not in the usual Scorsese style, as the runtime comes in at just over an hour and a half, but it's still very entertaining to watch this seemingly normal night spiral into something you'd never predict. The film sort of feels like a satirical parody of Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. Of course that isn't possible, seeing as this film came out 14 years before Eyes Wide Shut. However, that's just the sort of vibe I got. I do think this film isn't quite as good as Scorsese's more recent work, but it's by no means bad, and I think it still stands up to this day if you like films where by the end of it you think, what the f*** have I just watched? Anyways, I'm gonna give it C tier. Next up is The Colour of Money, starring Paul Newman and a very young Tom Cruise. This film is all about pool hustling, where ex-hustler Eddie, played by Newman, is inspired to get back into the game by a very talented but very arrogant young player, Vincent, played by Cruise. Now, you may be thinking, how can you possibly make a 2-hour film about playing pool without it being painfully boring? And well, to that I'd say the film is probably as good as it could be for a film about pool, but for me I still found it a bit dull. The film was excellently acted and there are a few decent moments here and there, but that just wasn't enough to win me over. I also particularly disliked how the film ended, but that just comes down to personal preference, I guess. Now, something I didn't know until after I'd watched the film was that this film is actually a sequel to a film that came out in the 60s called The Hustler, again starring Paul Newman as the same character Eddie. I think knowing that would have let me put Eddie's character and the whole arc of the film into a bit more context and helped understand Eddie's motivation for a lot of things he did in the film. Unfortunately though, that was not the case for me when I watched it, so I'm afraid we're gonna have to give F tier.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
That's gotta be one of the coolest opening lines ever, right? If you only ever watch one gangster film in your life, make it Goodfellas. It is perfect. There's not one wasted scene, one line of dialogue, 1 inch of film that isn't brilliant. It follows the life of Henry Hill, played by Ray Liotta, who works his way into the Italian mafia at a young age and continues his career throughout the film. Throughout his life, he meets his mob partners, Jimmy Conway, played by De Niro, and Tommy DeVito, played by Joe Pesci. Of course, this mob lifestyle isn't sustainable, and so by the end of the film, Hill is left broken with his life in the gutter. But I'm not going to tell you how that happens, you have to watch it for yourself. Now, this film's got everything. A brilliantly told story, captivating dialogue, brutal but realistic violence, and above all, Something that you've probably noticed as a recurring theme in this list: unbelievably well-written characters. De Niro puts in another great performance as his character Conway, this cool, calm and collected guy that's never stressed and always knows what's going on. Whereas Pesci's character is the complete opposite. He's this short, loudmouth, mentally deranged, complete lunatic who will unalive you at a moment's notice if you just look at him funny and then laugh about it. He goes from charming and likable in one scene to the most despicable human alive in the next, and that just goes to show the quality of his performance. He definitely deserved the Oscar for that role. This film is the easiest S rank I'll ever give. Cape Fear is about a violent convict, Max Cady, played by Robert De Niro, who after being convicted and imprisoned for brutally assaulting a young girl, plans his violent revenge on the defense lawyer who put him behind bars. After serving his 14-year sentence, he is released and goes out to exact his revenge. Now, I think this is a great film throughout. It's a thrilling, emotionally charged watch, with the final scene on the boat still ingrained in my memory after almost 5 years since my last viewing. And who can forget the scene of Cady just floating above the water, staring, before he sinks to his demise. Now, I'd love to know De Niro's process of becoming these characters, because he's just so good at it. He just sort of melts and forms himself into these completely different people with no trace of the previous one. And this film is no exception. Nick Nolte and Jessica Lange are great and all, but make no mistake, this is De Niro's film. His performance is genuinely terrifying. Cape Fear is an often overlooked Scorsese picture in my opinion. It's brilliant and highly influential. I mean, if you've got a Simpsons parody made about you, then you know you've made it. However, put against these other exceptional films in this list, it's just not quite as good. It doesn't quite compare. And so for that reason, I'm going to give it B tier. I don't know any other way to say this, so I'm just going to say it. Casino's just a worse version of Goodfellas set in Las Vegas. There, I said it. I know, you all hate me now and are preparing a sacrifice to the goddess of death so that I may ruthlessly be struck down, but that's just my opinion.
What?
Of course, I am exaggerating here. Yes, there are similarities to Goodfellas, but the plot of the film is completely different and the settings are polar opposites. Unlike Goodfellas, Casino is bright and shiny and in your face. It's another classic gangster film where two best friends compete for control over an enormous gambling empire. The two friends are Ace Rothstein, played by De Niro, a gambling expert who always knows everything there is to know and never loses, and Nicky Santoro, played by Pesci, a ruthless mafia enforcer. Pesci's character here is essentially the same as the one in Goodfellas, an extremely violent, deranged maniac, but if anything, he's worse in this film if you can believe it. Both men are under the control of the mafia, and the whole scheme is funded by them. Ace is appointed as the casino executive, and Nicky is his protection, and everything runs smoothly. But with their bosses halfway across the country, and temptation all around them, things very quickly start to escalate. Now, the other key dynamic in the film is both men's relationship with an alluring, yet very problematic hustler named Ginger, played by Sharon Stone. I won't give anything away, but she's basically the catalyst for everything that goes wrong. She plays one of the most dislikable characters I've ever seen, and yet somehow you always end up feeling sorry for her. Without a doubt, she's the standout performance of the film. The film's a long one, even for Scorsese, coming in at just shy of 3 hours, and you do notice it, I have to say. It does drag towards the end. That being said, it's another brilliantly told story that deserves to be watched, so I'm gonna go A tier. This film is another one that I'd just never heard of before making this video. Unfortunately, however, in this case it was probably best left that way. Bringing Out the Dead is about an incredibly burnt out and overworked paramedic, Frank, played by Nicolas Cage, who is haunted by the lives of the patients he couldn't save and is really struggling to just maintain his sanity. We follow Frank across 3 nights, with each night somehow getting worse than the previous one. Now, this whole film just feels like a fever dream. Frank and his partner for the night are constantly on the move, going from call to call and then back to the emergency room, non-stop all night. Everywhere they get called out to is just one nightmare to another, and every patient is either a heart failure, an unaliving attempt, or a drug overdose. The issue with this style of film though is that nothing really happens. I get it's meant to be like a character study of Cage's character, but this time it just felt aimless. There is some sort of overarching story, but it's pretty irrelevant and not at all conclusive, and I really just didn't like the ambiguity of it all. Now there are a few redeeming features, most notably Cage's performance. He always takes well to slightly mentally unstable characters, I find. Also the vast array of weird and wonderful characters Frank encounters across his nights were a highlight. From the captain who promises Frank every night he'll fire him, but tomorrow.
You swore.
I'll fire you tomorrow.
To the policeman Gris, in charge of keeping the emergency room in check, whose biggest threat is...
Now look, don't make me take off my sunglasses.
To his different partners, who seem to get more demented every evening. Overall, did I enjoy the film? Not really. Was it all bad? Not at all. Are you liking the video and subscribing right now? I can only assume so. Overall, it gets D tier. Welcome to the world famous halftime show, where we wake up the viewers who've fallen asleep listening to me yap for 15 minutes and test to see who's really been listening. So without further ado, let's get started. Question 1. Who played Travis Bickle in Martin Scorsese's film Taxi Driver? Was it A. Al Pacino, B. Robert De Niro, C. Robert Redford, or D. Leonardo DiCaprio? The correct answer is B. Robert De Niro. Question number 2. Who played Rupert Pupkin in Martin Scorsese's film The King of Comedy? Was it A. Paul Newman, B. Robert De Niro, C. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, or D. Tom Cruise? The correct answer is B. Robert De Niro. And question number 3. Who played Jimmy Conway in Martin Scorsese's film Goodfellas? Was it A. Michelle Obama, B. Robert De Niro, C. Nicolas Cage, or D. Kim Jong-un? The correct answer is B. Robert De Niro. Well, that's all we've got time for, folks, this week, but be sure to tune in next week. Thanks for watching and goodbye.
Well, that was fucking dreadful.
Set in 1862, Gangs of New York is a story of revenge as Amsterdam Vallon, played by DiCaprio, seeks to kill Bill the Butcher, played by Daniel Day-Lewis, the man who killed his father. Now first of all, what sort of name is Amsterdam Vallon? It's like the 1800s equivalent of McLovin. The film is set in a very interesting period. At the time, New York is a complete hellhole. It's teeming with corruption, disease, rival gangs, crime and death. And that's really where the film excels. The setting. The cinematography and set design here is on another level. It feels like an entirely different world. It's an incredible achievement. The only thing that tops it is Day-Lewis's performance. He is just brilliant. After watching There Will Be Blood, I will now watch anything he's in no matter what, and again here he did not disappoint. His character Bill the Butcher is truly terrifying. He's a vile, bloodthirsty nativist that believes America belongs to the Americans and opposes the waves of Irish immigrants coming in. Sounds familiar? Every second he's on the screen, he steals all the attention, and every second he's not, you're just waiting for him to come back on. The film is worth a watch for his performance alone, really. Unfortunately, however, all of that just isn't enough to save it. The story is banal and really just a very basic revenge story once you boil it down. DiCaprio is also weak as the lead and simply can't compete with Day-Lewis's presence, and so I have to give this film C tier. How had I never heard of Howard Hughes before watching this film? I know the film is a dramatisation, but still, his life story is fascinating. For those who don't know, Howard Hughes was an American aerospace engineer, businessman, filmmaker, investor, philanthropist, and pilot. And during his lifetime was regarded as one of the most influential and richest people on the planet. The Aviator follows the early years of his career, whilst also depicting his somewhat disturbing personal life. What's clear from the beginning of the film is that Hughes was a genius. He knew exactly what he wanted and didn't care how difficult it was or how expensive it was going to be, he always got his own way. And by the end of it all, had an aviation empire worth billions of dollars. He also produced countless classic films like Scarface and Hell's Angels. He set the record for the fastest land plane in the world in 1935, with him as the pilot. He dated movie stars like Katharine Hepburn. I mean, From the outside, his life was pretty incredible. However, on the inside, it was anything but. We discover Hughes has severe OCD and a crippling fear of germs on account of his mother mistreating him as a child. As the film goes on, his battle with these demons gets harder and harder until eventually they engulf him. Now, I thoroughly enjoyed this film. As I've previously stated, biopics tend to be boring in my opinion, but seeing as Hughes' life was so remarkable, coupled with the additional layer to the film of Hughes' psychological battles, I found myself captivated pretty much throughout. I did find the runtime to be just slightly too long, but at this point I'm used to it with these films. The film was masterfully created by Scorsese. I love how he designed each year in the film to look just the way a colour movie from that time period would actually look. It's just incredible details like that which elevate him to the status he has. DiCaprio is excellent as Hughes, but the standout for me was Cate Blanchett as Katharine Hepburn. The 1920s accent is just so weird, but she nailed it. As for the ranking, this has got to be an A tier. This film is S tier, it just is. This is without a doubt my favourite film on the list, and probably one of my favourites of all time. It's got the most unbelievably stacked cast. DiCaprio, Matt Damon, Jack Nicholson, Mark Wahlberg, Alec Baldwin, Martin Sheen, Ray Winston, I mean it's just ridiculous. They're all incredible as well, every single one of them are brilliant. It's almost impossible to pick a frontrunner. The best part of the film though is the story. It's the mole film to end all mole films, and no, I'm not talking about these. It's about an undercover cop, played by DiCaprio, who's attempting to infiltrate a South Boston gang run by Frank Costello, played by Nicholson, and a mole in the police force, played by Damon, who's under the control of Costello, and they're both trying to identify each other without blowing their own cover. It's an incredibly complex story that demands you pay full attention the entire film, whilst also being a roller coaster of emotions. And the twist at the end, which happens in literally a couple of seconds, is one of the most jaw-dropping moments I've ever experienced. I was genuinely sat there, mouth open for the next 30 seconds. I could not believe what had just happened. There's only a couple of films I can think of that would compete with this twist, and coincidentally, one of them is next up. It's also got a cracking theme tune that hopefully will be playing behind me if copyright allows it. I know I said earlier I couldn't pick a favourite performance, but turns out I can, and it's Nicholson. He's repulsive, he's slimy, he's perverted, he's violent, he's just all round disgusting, and it's brilliant to watch. Wahlberg is a very close second though as the sort of foul-mouthed, hot-headed cop, and you can't tell me that last scene isn't the most satisfying ending to a film you've ever seen. I've already said it, S tier. We all know Scorsese is the king of biographical epics and crime films, so the absolute cheek of this man in his first ever proper psychological thriller to make the absolute masterpiece that is Shutter Island. For the people that aren't really into films, this is the film you show them to get them hooked. And I don't care if it's a bit film bro-y now, it's still one of my absolute favourites. Shutter Island is about two US Marshals, played by DiCaprio and Mark Ruffalo, who are sent to an asylum on a remote island in order to investigate the disappearance of a patient. Once they're there, however, it becomes clear to the viewer and to the characters that something is not right. Now, I'm not going to say any more than that because I would hate to ruin this film for you if you haven't seen it already. As I alluded to earlier, this film has potentially the best plot twist I've ever witnessed and undoubtedly the best of its decade. I don't care who you are or what you say, no one could have guessed it on their first watch, and if you say otherwise, I'll kidnap Liam Neeson's daughter and tell them you did it.
I will find you, and I will kill you.
Once you know it as well, the second watch becomes a completely new experience as you pick up so many little details and hints, you can't even believe you missed it the first time round. It's brilliantly acted all round. The atmosphere and ambience of the film is also so unnerving, with the asylum being set on this completely remote island and the intentionally off-putting weird way everyone interacts. It's also genuinely scary at times as well, with some decent jump scares dotted in. I had nightmares about this film for weeks as a child just watching the trailer. It's probably one of my most rewatched films ever, and I have to give it S tier. Hugo is another deviation from Scorsese's usual style, but in this case the payoff wasn't quite as great. This is really his first kids film and tells the story of a young orphan living in a train station in Paris who discovers a mystery involving his late father and a robot. Now, as I said, this is intended as a family film, and so it doesn't have the usual punch that Scorsese's films usually have. However, that's not to say it's a bad film, as I quite enjoyed watching it both as a child and an adult. The mystery that unravels is actually quite intriguing and keeps you guessing until the end, and it also gives us a first look at Asa Butterfield, who we now know and love as Otis Milburn in Sex Education. I also always thought it just looked weird. Like, I used to think the film was animated because it just looked too perfect. I know it isn't, but it just looked off to me. In other words though, the film does look stunning, and it's really well crafted. I don't know, I just keep going back and forth on it. It is a good film, it's just that when you compare it to all the other films on this list, it's just not of the same calibre. And I also do think that if Scorsese's name wasn't attached to this film, it wouldn't have been nearly as popular. And so I think I have to give it C tier. I think this is where most people will disagree with me. I don't even need to explain what the film's about, it's definitely the most well-known film on the list. Now, there's no arguing this film is brilliant. It's completely excessive, but in a good way. It's hilarious, it's exceptionally well acted, and I really think DiCaprio deserved the Oscar for it. It's masterfully directed, it's got more iconic scenes than some films have scenes, and it's got a woman that permanently altered the brain chemistry of all straight men on the planet. And yet, I don't like it. Now I can already hear the army of gilet-wearing finance bros marching towards my house trying to sell me a pen, but it's too late. To be more specific, I don't like what it stands for and what it's done to the world. People view Jordan Belfort as this absolute legend who made loads of money, slept with loads of women and has a yacht and did loads of drugs, when really, he's just a scumbag who stole hundreds of millions of dollars from investors and families purely out of greed. The whole notion of a finance bro really originated from this film, and Jordan Belfort is their almighty overlord. Objectively, the film is excellent, as I said, but its influence on the world has been poisonous. For that reason, it gets D tier. Where can you start with this film? Set in the 17th century, it follows two Portuguese Jesuit priests, played by Andrew Garfield and Adam Driver, who travel to Japan in order to track down their mentor, who is rumoured to have committed apostasy and renounced his religion. The film is based off the novel by Shusaku Endo, also named Silence. Both the novel and the film seek to understand why Christianity didn't take root in Japan, unlike in so many other European countries, and unfortunately there is just no easy answer to this question. Now at this point I need to say that this film is not going to be for everyone. It's undoubtedly one of the most brutal and difficult to watch films I've ever seen in my life. Any Christians that were discovered in Japan were ruthlessly tortured and unalived if they didn't renounce their beliefs. The priests were captured and made to watch the torture and were told it would not stop until they themselves also apostatized. I can't really describe how it feels to watch this film, so I think it's best you just watch it yourself if you're interested. It tries to tackle some of the most complex and nuanced concepts you could think of, and I think does it masterfully. Andrew Garfield puts in a brilliant performance as usual, and cinematography wise, the film is stunning. I love how the hazy, misty shots of the backdrop at the beginning, compared to the clean, crisp ones at the end, are used as an analogy to the mind and soul of the priests as the film goes on. I feel about this film the same way I feel about something like Requiem for a Dream. I can't say I would recommend it, and I'm positive I'll never watch it again. However, it is undeniably brilliant, and so on balance, I have to give it B tier. And we're back to Scorsese's bread and butter, back to the films that made him who he is. The Irishman is a retelling of the life of Frank Sheeran, of course played by Robert De Niro, a World War II veteran who became a hitman for the mob and became tied to the mysterious disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. Now this film is everything you could want from a Scorsese gangster film. A great story, brilliant cast, excellent directing, engaging dialogue, it had it all. It even brought back the iconic duo of De Niro and Pesci again, which may be the last time we ever see them on screen together. And add Al Pacino into the mix, who puts in a brilliant performance as Jimmy Hoffa, you've got the ingredients for a masterpiece. And yet, something just felt off. It hurts to say, but this is not Scorsese back to his best, and it's a real shame. I do think, however, that this is down to something completely out of Scorsese's control, and that's that these guys are getting old, man. In the scenes where De Niro is having to punch or kick someone, you can clearly see him struggling to get through it physically, and it just doesn't look natural at all, which is honestly heartbreaking. The worst part though was the attempted de-aging done on De Niro in the flashbacks. I get why they did it, but it just doesn't work at all. It looked completely wrong and just removed all authenticity and immersion in the scene. It's a difficult one to take honestly, but I have to be fair, and so I'm going to give The Irishman a B tier. And at long last, we arrive here at Scorsese's most recent film, Killers of the Flower Moon. At the time of writing this, I've literally just come out the cinema, so these are my immediate thoughts. I really like the film. As expected, it's an expertly told and presented story, and is also a story that was undeniably worth telling. I never knew of this dark part of American history, and I believe it was retold in the best way possible. The film is about the murders of members of the Osage tribe that occurred under mysterious circumstances in the 1920s and eventually prompted an FBI investigation. At the beginning of the film, we're told that per capita, the Osage people were the richest people on the planet due to the vast amounts of oil on their land. This caused a great deal of tension between the Osage and the white people who lived amongst them, and that was really the catalyst for everything that happened. Throughout the film, we follow Ernest Burkhart, played by DiCaprio, a dim-witted and easily led man who had just returned from war to work for his uncle, William Hale, played by De Niro. Hale is sort of the main man in the community and is also a close friend to the Osage tribe. De Niro puts in his usual great performance, but DiCaprio was on another level. From his voice work to his emotional range to the way he held his jaw forward throughout the film, he was just brilliant. Now, I don't really want to say anything more about the story, because I think you'll enjoy the film much more if you discover everything yourself. Once everything starts falling into place and you start piecing everything together though, it's a truly fascinating watch. Now, to address the elephant in the room, the runtime. The film is 3.5 hours long, and for me it's just too long. I know you're going to call me a child and say that I can't sit through anything longer than 30 seconds without someone playing Subway Surfers in the bottom half of the screen, but honestly, I'm not the type of person to be put off by a long runtime. The film only really gets going after the first hour though, and once you're there I never look back, but for me I just found the start too slow. And that's not even to say I wasn't enjoying myself, because I was. Every scene was a joy to watch, but it just didn't grip me like the way the rest of the film did. But of course, a lot of people will disagree with that, and that's totally fine, and I look forward to seeing everyone's thoughts in the comments. Overall, this film is excellent. It's masterfully put together and directed, stunning to look at and brilliantly acted, but you have got to be willing to put in the time to get the end result. I'm giving it A tier. And there it is, my complete ranking of pretty much all of Martin Scorsese's films. Now, if by some miracle you're still here, thank you for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed it. This man is rather partial to a long film, so this video has taken a while to make, so a like and a subscribe would really be much appreciated. And also be sure to leave a comment if you agreed or disagreed with anything I said. If you're still hungry for more though, check out this other video I made, where I talk about the current state of films.